Can you hear me? Oh, good. I have to stand on my toes. Thank you for coming today. My name is Nancy Burke. I'm with the Staff Advisory Committee, and we help to organize these brown bag events, our lunch bunches at the colleges, Rice Fest, and the ever-popular ice cream social this July. So today, the Honorable Edward P. Djerejian served in the U.S. Foreign Service for 8 presidents from 1962 to 94. Prior to his nomination by President Clinton as U.S. Ambassador to Israel, he was Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs in both the George H.W. Bush and Clinton administrations. He was the U.S. Ambassador to the Syrian Arab Republic. He also served as Special Assistant to President Ronald Reagan and as Deputy Press Secretary for Foreign Affairs in the White House. After his retirement from government service in 1994, Ambassador Djerejian became the founding director of Rice University's Baker Institute. Ryan Kirksey, the Baker Institute's Director of Operations and Finance, will moderate the discussion today, and I want to give my personal thanks to Ryan for organizing this event. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Baker Institute today. We'll hopefully make this very informal today. I'm going to have a few questions prepared for the ambassador, and I'll ask those, and then we have a couple of microphones set up here in the room. After I'm done with mine, feel free to step up and ask some questions. The only reason we have the mics is we're going to record this and post it online for anyone that wasn't able to be here today. So feel free, again, as we wrap up here to come up to the microphones and ask some questions to the ambassador, and we'll just make this sort of an informal dialogue. Ambassador, you and I have worked together now almost 10 years, so I know a lot about the history here and a lot about you, but if you don't mind telling us just a little bit about, we just heard you worked for 8 presidents in your career in the Foreign Service, maybe how that career prepared you to be the leader of a public policy think tank.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. I'm glad to see Kevin Kirby here and David here, because then I know that the lights aren't going to go off. We're paying our bills, Kevin, you know that. Well, it was really talk about paradigm shifts coming from the world of public service, the military and government, and coming into academia. I remember, I will never forget that day, August 4th, 1994, when my wife and I, Francoise and I, and our daughter arrived at Bush International in the seething heat of Houston. And you know, I had just come from being an American ambassador in one of our largest embassies in the world, in Israel. I had 500 people reporting to me, and when I made a decision, they'd all salute smartly and say, "Yes, sir." And I come into the world of academia, where the concept of teamwork is an oxymoron, and where the decision-making process is quite different, and where dealing with the faculty, my big joke with the faculty, which I thought I was going to offend them, but they actually took it as a badge of courage, is I said, you know, you guys are so difficult, I'd rather deal with the Israelis and the Palestinians than with you guys. And they looked at me and they say, really, are we that tough? I said, yes, you are. But, you know, we had to acclimate both to a city that we didn't know, an academic environment. And one of the really interesting things was that what you learn in public service and diplomacy, there's negotiation skills of dealing with people, trying to understand the other's viewpoint before you start engaging with them in order to promote whatever interests you may have. Really adapted at the end of the day very well to academia. But I realized that everything was a negotiation on campus. And so I guess I was professionally ready for that. But one of the smartest things I did was I brought on Alan Matisow as my academic associate director for academic affairs. Of course, Alan was Dean of Humanities for many years and knew the campus and academia very well. So he kept me safe and not making stupid decisions vis-a-vis the faculty and the student body. And so we got off to a good start. I think what is very interesting is when you make career shifts like that is to really understand the new environment, but then understand what you can bring to the new environment, but even equally important, what you have to learn about that new environment. So I had a lot of learning to do. And it took a couple of years.
Right.
But I remember, you know, we're in this beautiful building, and, you know, we built this, as you well know, in 1997. And basically, but when we first got here, we were in temporary offices in Fondren Library. And I had an executive rental secretary every week that changed every week. The university gave me someone called a department coordinator. I never knew what that job title means, but he was my administrative staff. And I remember my wife and I going, you know, we bought a home here near the campus on Sunset Boulevard, and going home and actually writing out invitations on a kitchen table, you know, invitation lists, Baker Institute events. It really started out as a mom and pop operation. And then, you know, now we got a machine that does our events, as you well know, and our staff here is just, it's amazing. But one thing that, several things we did, and I don't want to brag about the Baker Institute. I think it speaks for itself. You know, I think we were very, very fortunate to be housed in one of the best universities in the country, to have a man's name next to the Institute like Secretary Baker. We had a lot of things going for us, potentially, but we had to build it from the ground up. And that was quite challenging. And one of the first things I did was talk to a very important professor here that Alan put me in touch with, John Bowles, to learn about the history of Rice. And he informed me of Edgar Odell Lovett's grand tour of the universities of the world at the Board of Trustees. Captain Baker at the time, you know, send him around the world to visit the best universities in the world and the country, and then come back and establish what was Rice Institute. So I decided I'd do what I called the dwarfed Lovett tour, which was to some of the best university-based think tanks in America. So I went to Stanford University, Hoover Institution, went to Princeton, the Woodrow Wilson School, Harvard, the Kennedy School, et cetera. And we were getting some negative press here from the Houston Chronicle in terms of what are they trying to do at Rice, establish this Baker Institute, and it was a bit challenging. So I decided to do something that I didn't realize Rice didn't do. I called Todd Ackerman, who at the time was the journalist for educational affairs. I still think he is, I think. And I didn't tell Malcolm Gillis, the president of the university, I was doing this. And I called Todd Ackerman. I said, Todd, I'm doing a minor Edgar Odell Lovett tour. I said, I'd like you to accompany me. And when I told Malcolm Gillis this, he went absolutely wild. He said, Ed, that's the worst decision you can make in your life. This guy's going to tear us apart. Well, it turned to be exactly the opposite, because Todd did come with me on this tour, and he saw what we were trying to do, and he started to write, I wouldn't say praiseworthy articles, but he was beginning to write constructive articles about the possibility of this think tank emerging at the heart of Rice University. But I came back from that tour, and I was really both depressed and inspired. Depressed because I said, how can we ever compete with the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world? They've been around for years, for decades. In fact, the Hoover Institution at Stanford was created before Herbert Hoover was president, 1919. And do great work. Everyone was doing great work. They had large cash flows, they had many scholars, and what are we going to do at Rice, which is small, in Houston, which is not New York, Boston, or Washington, where all the major think tanks are located? How can we make a difference? So we came across the concept that still guides our decisions on our research programs, the principle of comparative advantage. What do we have here at Rice on campus that is very strong, that can be translated into public policy? What do we have in Houston? So, I mean, it's evident science and engineering, the economics department here. We started building alliances within the campus, and then Houston, the energy capital of the world. So our first flagship program was energy, which now is, you know, we were just ranked this in 2012, as you well know, as the 6th best global think tank on energy. But we played to our comparative advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And we did health policy because the Texas Medical Center is across the street. We did Middle East because of Baker and me. Space policy, George Abbey, former director of the Johnson Space Center. Tax policy because of our alliances with the economics department here, George Zudrow, John Diamond, and on and on and on. And so we played to what we could do, if I could use the word indigenously.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't try to be something we couldn't be. And I think that has been a trademark of our success. The other thing is that despite all the doubts on the part of the faculty that I was going to be James A. Baker III's campaign manager for his run for the presidency in 1996, mm-hmm. and that this was going to be a Republican right-wing think tank, you know, we established it as the other principle, nonpartisan. Mm-hmm. Neither left, neither right. Wherever the research goes, that's where our conclusions and our policy. And we've done that. I think that we've done that very well. But the faculty had a lot of doubts on that. But then I did something that Alan knows. It's not a secret anymore. It's history now. But the first outside senior appointment I made was a Democrat. And that sort of shocked the faculty because it didn't fit the prejudicial view that some of them were having, that we were going to be a Republican right-wing think tank. And that was the man who became mayor of Houston. So, you know, we got over all these hurdles, I think, by doing the right thing.
Yeah. So knowing the success that we've had the past 20 years, can you talk a little bit about maybe where the Baker Institute is headed next, some of the new things they'll be doing, what we're pursuing?
Well, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We've already had several events, and we have a whole series of events that are highlighting our key programs. And what we're thinking of doing, and we've started with our energy program, is creating centers and consolidating our programs and making them larger than the sum of the parts. And so the first center we've established is the Center for Energy Studies. Mm-hmm. That Ken Medlock is leading. He's the senior director. And what that puts together is what we're doing in oil, gas, environment, regulation, electricity, and cybersecurity in the energy field. So we folded in our cyberspace program that Chris Bronk leads into energy, because that's our comparative advantage. Mm-hmm. And as you know, the cyber attacks against Saudi Aramco, the Shamoon virus, the energy sector is one of the highest national security targets for cyber attack in this new world we're going into. And so we have quite a body. We have 2 endowed fellows in that. We have Chris, and we're building this program. And as you know, everything takes money. Mm-hmm. And so one of my key jobs is leading our fundraising efforts at the Institute with my development team. But I keep telling my development team that you could have all the greatest vision in the world, but vision without funding is hallucination. So you have to really bring the money in to really be able to have your programs in place. But we've established a Center for Energy Studies. It's off to a great start. We're thinking of establishing a center on the Middle East, a center on health policy, et cetera, et cetera. To answer your question, Ryan, as we go forward, I think you're going to see these centers created. That for the next 5 years, I think we'll have them fully in place with programmatic funding, the necessary endowments, and that's our vision for the future.
Okay. And just looking at the audience here, faculty, staff, maybe talk a little bit about how, if people are interested in getting involved, how they can get involved with the Baker Institute, how they can participate.
Well, we have our Baker Institute Roundtable and Associate Roundtable. Associate Roundtables for the younger generation of corporate leaders, mostly in Houston, coming in so that we can have a generational progression of supporters for the Baker Institute from the Houston community. Our roundtables are some of our staunchest supporters in the Houston community, many of the elite of the community, a lot of professionals there too. But we do have a university roundtable membership, which I would urge you all to look into. If you join, it's at a reduced rate, and it allows you to really partake in our programs, for the faculty and the staff to take part of the special programs that we have at the Baker Institute. We put on a lot of really interesting and meaningful events here and programs that enrich one's life and knowledge of some of the most contentious and important public policy issues on domestic and foreign policy. So that's one thing. Social media, we're in the throes of going through the painstaking process of deconstructing our antiquated website and getting a new website, which will, quite frankly, hopefully represent what the Baker Institute has become, because our current website is just too static and dull. And so hopefully by no later than this summer, as you well know, May, June, we'll have a new, vibrant, interactive website, which will allow us, through social media, through people visiting us on our website, really take benefit of what we're doing. And I'm forgetting one thing.
I think you got it.
I got it? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
You remembered all the talking points. That's
okay.
Good.
I was briefed well.
I'll ask one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. Anyone that wants to ask a question. Anything stand out in your mind in terms of, you talked about some of this interaction with the faculty and interaction with the university, sort of just some memorable moments of, since you've been at Rice now 20 years, and sort of what Rice has meant to the Baker Institute and the reverse as well.
Well, I think we've been very fortunate that, I've served 2 presidents at Rice. I report directly to the president of the university. We're not a school, but both presidents and provosts that we've worked with consider the Baker Institute at the level of a school. I'm treated as if I'm a dean, so that we can interact with all the schools on campus. So one great thing has been the support we've gotten from Malcolm Gillis and certainly with David Lebron. That's very important. And then, as I said, the engagement of the faculty. We've got 20 faculty positions, Baker Institute Rice scholars who are faculty professors who do policy work for us. But we've had some memorable events here. I mean, it's just not only our groundbreaking, where we had several presidents here, we've had leaders like Nelson Mandela, who's the hero of my time, is Nelson Mandela, who as we speak is ailing now, and everyone is very concerned, but when he came, that was one of the most memorable moments I can think of. My wife and I were walking jogging around the campus, and she said, where are you gonna have the Mandela event? And I said, well, we're thinking of Studi Hall. And she said, this is gonna be massive. Think about the basketball court. Remember we worked on it, and I said, the basketball court? So we spent $18,000 fixing up the basketball court. It wasn't the nice Tudor hall that we have now, and we cleaned it up, and we had 6,500 people at that event. And it was one of the most moving events because we also did something. We went to not only the Rice students that were lined up.
Right.
I mean, they were lined up, to get in. And then we went to the other universities, but we did something that we've never done before. We went to the senior high schools that have social science, civic studies programs, seniors. But we went especially to the disadvantaged schools, the Black community, the Latino community, because how many times in their lifetime will they be able to see an iconic figure like this, And so they all came, and buses here, and That was a moving event. And I told him, because he was old then and frail, you know, he spent 27 years in jail. And in fact, the lung infection that he's suffering from today is part of his incarceration, his causality is part of his incarceration. But I said, you know, Mr. President, you don't have to shake all the Rice ambassadors we had. He went, each Rice ambassador student, he shook their hand. And during the Q&A session, we had written Q's and A's, and I was looking out in that huge basketball, and I was fielding 500 written Q's and A's. It was impossible. But then there was one that caught my eye, and that was the last question I asked him. You know, he was at one podium, I was at another podium, and it said, Mr. President, I'm a 12th grader. Who are you really? And what would you like history to say about you? It's a great question. And Mandela, you know, sort of glanced at me. He always had that twinkle in his eye, and he looked out at the audience. He said, well, he said, a lot of people try to make me out to be a saint, but I'm not a saint. But if your definition of a saint is a sinner who just keeps on trying, I may qualify. Brought the house down. So, I mean, there are moments like that, you know, with Gorbachev, with, there was a funny event with Putin when Putin came, when he was first elected president. He was much more popular than he is now. He was on his way to, he came here, then he was on his way to Crawford, to President Bush's ranch. So we had these White House helicopters descend on Rice. I don't think that's ever happened before. We had 4 White House helicopters next to Shepherd School of Music, because he had the event in Shepherd School. So we had President Bush 41, Secretary Baker, me, Malcolm Gillard. We were as a receiving team. So it's very funny. So these 4 helicopters start descending on the campus. So we're looking at each other. Which helicopter is Putin in? So President Bush turns to us and says, I have a lot of experience on this. I know which one he's in. So we followed the president. Wrong helicopter. We went to the wrong helicopter. Then we had to rush to the right helicopter where he was at, you know. And there's so many, I can't remember all the events we've had, the Kissingers, the interaction, the leaders. But one of the things that's really, I think, made us very enthusiastic at this stage in the last few years is what we're doing with the Rice students. Because we've really opened up the Institute to the Rice students. So we have at least 10 Baker Institute fellows who teach courses, regular Rice curricular courses. I teach one on the Middle East, but you know, we have 10 of us who are teaching. But then Alan Matisow has just put together, the first time in our history, a Baker Institute undergraduate course. And on public policy, that's team-led, and it's proving to be one of the most popular courses for undergrads. And they get the great benefit of hearing from an array of Baker Institute fellows on energy, on economics, on Middle East, on health policy, et cetera. And then the other thing we do, and David Liebran told me he thinks it's the best internship program at Rice, is our Jesse Jones Leadership Program, the one that we work on every year. We send 12 Rice students to Washington, pay for everything except their bar bills. And it's, they have to do a research paper, but they have to find a job in a government agency or an NGO, and it's the cream of the Rice students, because as you know, the competition, hundreds apply, 12 are chosen. And what's encouraged me a great deal is that half of them go on to public service, and they've been really terrific. So we're doing a lot with the students now.
Good. Why don't I open up to anyone in the audience who'd like to ask a question? Feel free. We've got time for some more. Yeah, David?
I got to be careful. This is coming from the president's office.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time, and it's really remarkable what you've accomplished in 20 years. I had 2 things that you sort of touched on in different ways.
I've only been here 19. I mean,
2 things that seem to be distinctive about the Baker Institute are, one, that it's nonpartisan, and 2, that that it's not a degree granting institute. And so I guess my questions are both about those two issues. Looking forward, how does one maintain not just a brand of nonpartisan, because we have media outlets that claim to be nonpartisan, and that's not always the case. But how do you maintain not just the brand, but also the production of nonpartisan work, and what does that mean to you? Okay. And then the second thing is, could you ever foresee the Baker Institute offering some kind of degree program?
Good questions. Well, on the nonpartisan issue, I think it's part of the genetic code of the Baker Institute of what we've accomplished, what we've established. The other part, as I said, is the principle of comparative advantage. Don't try and take on something that you can't do well and that you don't have enough resources for. But the nonpartisan part of the job, look, we have our honorary chair, Secretary Baker, who's a very prominent Republican, and that he will continue to be a Republican and voice his ideas on political issues and foreign policy and domestic. But his institute is entirely different than that. His institute is truly nonpartisan, and he supports that fully. I think the integrity of maintaining nonpartisan resides in whoever occupies my seat, and in the future, whoever occupies my seat, to make sure that the fellows and the scholars are given the full academic freedom to say it as their research takes them, no matter what the political coloration is. And another important aspect of that is that whoever's sitting in my seat, that no matter what the color of the money is in terms of the funding, that does not influence the political outcome. And I could give you an early example of that without mentioning names, but early on we got considerable funding to do a tax policy research program. The money came from very prominent Houstonians who are very conservative. But I told them up front, I don't know where the outcome's going to be. We've got great economists, great experts, but if you believe that we will do the necessary scholarship objectively, I cannot guarantee to you that it's going to come out the way you want. And indeed, it did not come out the way what their political position was on taxation, which was a national retail sales tax. But we addressed the issue, but did a very objective paper and study on the pros and cons. And they respected us for it. You see, that's what's important, is that making sure that as Rice itself represents, that you cannot fool around with the integrity of academic research. And so whoever's the director of the Baker Institute will have to carry that baton forward. What was your other question? Yeah. With this, we've debated, and we're not there yet. But Alan and I have talked about this a great deal. It's whether we do a master's in international affairs is something that we are looking at with the School of Social Sciences and working with Lynn Ragsdale. I think that's a progression that we might certainly gravitate toward. Another much greater ambition, way beyond me, will be whether a school is established of public policy or government affairs. But that will have to be for another generation as the Baker Institute evolves.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? This will be dangerous.
Nothing dangerous. So, Ambassador, I find that among my peers outside of this building, there's a general apathy or lack of enthusiasm towards public policy. What do you think it takes to foster that inspiration, enthusiasm for policy pieces, and what role does the Institute play or can it play in that process?
That's a good question. Well, one thing we do assiduously here is inculcate into the Rice students that interact with us how important public policy is in their lives. And one thing that I've been very encouraged with is, like, half the Rice students that take my Middle East course are chemistry majors, physics majors, engineering, computational engineering majors. And they do, we have the 2 majors here at Rice, which I like a lot, but what I see is that there's an appreciation amongst the Rice students who are very good of the role of public policy in their lives. Because even if you're a scientist, you're not just a scientist. And one thing that we try to inculcate into the students here and our interns is that no matter what career you go into in life, if you're a scientist, an engineer, a doctor, whatever you go into, that humanities, you are walking into a world of public policy, because politics has such a huge influence in our lives. The decisions that our leaders make in Washington, in state legislatures, in municipalities, that has an influence on what you're doing in your life. And you have to understand public policy. And Baker has a great definition of leadership and public policy: knowing what to do and doing it. And that sounds very simple, but it's very difficult sometimes, because knowing what to do, make the right assessment, come to the right policy conclusions, and then having the ability to execute that into action is critical. That's leadership. So we also try to inculcate leadership into young people and students. But I cannot underestimate the role of public policy in all of our lives. The wrong decisions in the public policy field can lead to disastrous consequences. And we've lived through all that in the 20th century, 21st century, be they wars, be they famine, be economic crises, in the world of human rights, civil rights. Public policy makes a huge difference. What I worry about, and I think your question has this behind it, is that a lot of people, young people, don't understand the importance of public policy. They think it's something out there that's entirely different than what they're doing or what they need to be involved in. And it's a critical mistake, because, again, no matter what you're doing, especially when you advance in a career, you're going to find out that your life work is affected by political decisions that are being made all around you. So having an appreciation of public policy, I think, is absolutely critical at an early age. And I think we're having some success in that, because I'll tell you, take a look at the Baker Institute Student Forum. That student forum started years ago, early on, and I was asked to see a group of 5 Rice students. This is like 1998 or something, 97, whatever it was. But so these Rice students came to my office, all dressed in suits. The ladies were in wonderful dresses. I said, these are Rice students. They don't look like the Rice students I see at campus. They were all dressed up, and they said, we would like to establish the Baker Institute Student Forum, because we think public policy is important, and we want a student voice in what the Baker Institute is and what it becomes. This was music to my ears. And now that Baker Institute Student Forum is really vibrant. It's grown geometrically. And I'll tell you, the presidential debates that these students put on here, and they have the conservative club and the liberal club of Rice University, is more informed than the presidential debates we had in the campaign. And I'm not exaggerating. What these kids here at Rice, the debates we've had on tax policy, on civil rights, I mean, you name it, has been more informed in these discussions we've had. So the students at Rice are getting it. And another role that we've taken on, that we attach a great deal of importance on, is inculcating leadership amongst the students, which is also inculcating a sense of public service and public policy. But a lot has to be done. And I think the more our institute gets known, I mean, we have a national now, we have a local, national, and international platform. But again, I get back, when we have our new website in place, I think we're going to be even more effective in getting our word out. And I think we're doing a public service.
Other questions?
Yes. Oh, good. April 10th, gun control, student debate. Bring your guns. Yes.
Hi, Ambassador. Could you give us a brief history of this candelabra? I think it's the most beautiful part of our building, and every time I hear a rice tour, I always hear a different story.
Okay, well, when we built this building, this is even before your time, Kevin, right? We built this building before you came here. So we hired one of the best architects. I think we made a right choice. He was a former dean of the School of Architecture at Yale. He had established his own practice in Chicago, Thomas Beebe. And he was an expert in transforming classical buildings like this one into modern functional working buildings. And he had a sense of history and all that, and he was very impressed with Lovett, the architecture of Lovett Hall. And I said, we'd like to have a minor Lovett, like I did the minor Lovett tour. We'd like to have a minor Lovett here. And so we did a very classic building. But it had to function as a public policy institute and function with modernity. So he did that. He achieved that, and we're very happy with this building. But this was his idea. This chandelier is inspired by the chandelier in the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, which is a beautiful, it's one of the treasures of Islamic architecture, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. And if you know these Ottoman and Islamic chandeliers in these big mosques, they're like cast iron, and they have oil lamps on them. And so he was inspired by that. So he made a modern version of the chandelier in the Blue Mosque. And of course, we have electricity. But what's great about this thing is that we decided it goes all the way up, and then it comes all the way down. So when we give dinners here, we can bring the chandelier down and make this big space a much more intimate setting because the light is closer to the people. And then we did have the illusion that we would have people in the galleys here watching some of our events, but that usually doesn't happen. But it can go up enough where they could see the events from the galleys here also. So this was inspired by the beautiful, if you're ever in Istanbul, go to the Blue Mosque and you'll see that this is a modern replica of that. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.